Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Your Favorite Movies. This is episode 20, or 20 episodes in. That is insane. Today, I'm joined by Guy at the Movies. Joe, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk today. I'm a massive fan of your stuff. And what are we talking about today?
Thank you. Today we are talking about the epic Batman versus Superman.
This is one that I already know before somebody watches the video, they're gonna give a shit in the comments, no matter what.
Absolutely.
We're
Absolutely.
getting it, and I'm glad that you actually picked this one because I'm a big fan of this movie. Like I love this movie, so you know it's more common now for people to like it because of the Ultimate Edition. And are you specifically referring to the Ultimate Edition?
So I like the original theatrical release, but I do think the
Me
Ultimate
too.
Edition totally adds, it fills in the gaps of where everyone else was complaining about, like, well, they didn't explain
Yes.
that or they jumped over that. It's like, yeah, it's in the movie. It just wasn't in the theatrical cut.
Yeah, it's like, WB just hates Snyder and stuff, but I'm glad that we're getting all this stuff now. And do you remember the first time you watched the movie?
I do. I absolutely do. I remember I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very different, similar to how I felt watching Man of Steel. I remember going into Man of Steel thinking like it was going to be some, upbeat Superman movie, and
Yeah.
instead we got like Snyder's realistic take on things. But I remember going to see Batman versus Superman with my two of my friends, and I was like having a blast in it. And we walked out, and they were like, "That was trash," and I got really upset. And to this day, we'll remember that moment. But I I really enjoyed it. I mean, I think I'm sure we'll talk about some of the parts that people complain about, but I just think
Yeah.
it was pretty brilliant in a way.
I agree. Like I honestly think this is an insanely well-made movie. It's one that's really overhated. And even when I originally saw the movie and I knew people didn't really like love it or anything, I was like, no, I do really enjoy this. I remember watching it because it was like I knew it was a darker movie. I knew it was a darker movie, and I still remember the night before getting tickets. And I went to see it with my Oma, which means grandma in Dutch, and like she's older, but we went on to see like John Wick 3 together and stuff like so that was like our first exposure because the year before we went to see like Ant-Man, so very different movies.
Right.
And one thing I remember being in the theater is the very quick bathtub scene. I remember her just going like this to me, and I just laughed because I'm like, I know it's gonna be nothing. And I remember going into it. Now, my friend had spoiled the movie for me. My friend at the time was really bad with spoilers, so he spoiled The Force Awakens for me,
Oh,
this
jeez.
one, and I think one more. Yeah, I will never forget that. And he's like, oh yeah, I mean, we're gonna talk spoilers in the video, but this isn't a spoiler. He goes, oh yeah, Batman wins. But what he didn't realize, he walked out 30 minutes before the movie was over because he was too scared. So I went to the movie expecting it to be like really scary, and I think there was like one time where I jumped because of the bats or something. So I went into it expecting something very different, but when I came out of it, I was like, for the most part, that was pretty good. And even like a much younger me, I was like, I definitely like this, and because Batman is my favorite character of all
Sure.
time. For those who don't know, he's my favorite character of all time. So I was excited. So I mean, I liked it, and then earlier this year, I think, right either before or after the Snyder Cut, I rewatched this one, the Ultimate Edition, and I just loved it once again. And how many times have you seen this one?
Oh my God, countless. And it's funny now too. Like I have a dog in my apartment, and I put on movies for him when I leave. And Batman versus Superman or Justice League, Zack Snyder's Justice League, are great movies to put on because they're long, and I don't have to
Yeah.
worry about them asking like, "Are you still watching?" or whatever. So I forced my dog to become a fan, but I end up watching Batman versus Superman all the time because, and it's also, like when I visit my parents, my dad's a big TV movie guy, and he always is flipping through, and it never fails. Batman versus Superman is on TNT or TBS or
Yes,
something,
it
and I'm
is.
like,
I like
let's
this.
go.
Yeah, I think I've seen it about four times maybe because I saw it in theaters. I watched it at a resort that we were at, like with my family. I think back in 2017, probably. It
Okay.
probably would have been the year after when it was released. And I know for sure this year, and I think I might have watched it one more time randomly. So I've seen it a considerable amount of times, and there is problems with the movie, but for me, it just gets better and better the more I watch it because there's little details, and that's what I love about Snyder. Because I know again, Man of Steel is very diverse. I love Man of Steel. I love the Snyder cut. Like
Yeah.
so, he's an amazing director, and I love the little details. And for like the added scenes, for you, what do you think is like the most important one?
So I talked about how it explains a little bit more, right? And so the one I think about all the time is the wheelchair bomb and
Yes.
why Superman couldn't see it, and until the last minute, and that it's obviously the lead. If you know Superman, you know that he can't see through lead, and they don't explain that in the theatrical cut. So if you're not a Superman purist, or if you're not familiar with it, it's not going to be, something that a regular person walking into that movie understands. And that's explained in a comment, I think, from Amy Adams. um,
I think so.
I think it's when she's on the banks of the river or whatever. I think she that's so
Yep.
weird that I like can point that out. But I think she says that, and I'm like, why was this not in the movie? Like, there's so many little things that were cut out that would have given more detail and breadth to, what we were seeing. So that's definitely one of them, and I think the other one would be Jenna Malone's character. I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And I thought they were like playing with what they could do with her in the future. So it's upsetting that that stuff gets cut because, you know, not to get into like a big Snyder defender mode, but
That's
um,
okay. Go ahead.
I mean, so I have problems with some of his movies. Like Army of the Dead, wasn't the biggest fan of. I thought there was some issues with that. But when it comes to these movies, like Warner Brothers hired him to do a job. He pitched what he was going to do. It wasn't one movie, it was building things. And there's stories about like how they were trying to rush things, and so Batman versus Superman was like the next step that he proposed. um, so on and so forth, but they just kept like cutting his creative vision, and when you do that you end up with a choppy movie. That's what we saw with
Yep.
Suicide Squad back in 20 what 16, 17.
16. Yep.
So it's just so frustrating to me because he knows how to make a good superhero movie, and he, I think, is now like synonymous with trouble and crazy fans and stuff. But
Yeah. And studio interference. Like when every
exactly,
time I think of studio interference, I think straight to Snyder. And I feel like by like the Snyder cut, I'm so glad we got it because I loved it. And I feel like by now they should know that when they, when they released this movie, people were not the biggest fan of it. Like everybody was kind of mid on it.
yeah,
But then they released the Ultimate Edition. A lot of people loved it, or at least liked it quite a bit more. So
yeah,
I feel like they should have just thought of that right away. It shouldn't have taken that long for the Snyder cut. And yeah, I feel like we're kind of
absolutely,
both. I feel like we're kind of both Snyder fanboys in a way. And
yeah.
I gotta say, like, what is it about this movie that pushes it above all the other like superhero movies? Like, is this your favorite one? Are there other ones you like more? Or I know this is one of yours.
It's one of my favorites. I have a hard time with thinking of like what my favorite superhero movie is. I personally I love Thor Ragnarok in the Marvel world.
Yeah.
But when it comes to DC, I'm always partial to DC because I love the characters, but I also love the realistic turns that they take and the plot lines.
Yes.
I think Batman versus Superman does a really good job of picking up where Man of Steel left off. That's a really creative way to do that, with Ben Affleck going through Metropolis and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, I love that. But it, even like, again, we're gonna get to this, I'm sure, but like the Martha piece, right? Like that's real. That makes sense to me, and I thought
Me
that was
too.
really creative. And it's all about like the deeper themes of love and like our place in society and outsiders. And there's so much that you can take from it. And I'm not knocking Marvel because I love Marvel for what it is, but I also love DC for what it is. I love the serious nature of it, and that's what I thought Snyder did really well. It wasn't everyone's cup of tea. So like people that hate on Snyder are probably hating on him because they just like, number one, maybe they just didn't like his movies, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Number two, maybe they didn't like the serious tone. I personally do, and that's why I think Batman versus Superman is one of those that introducing Ben Affleck as like this hardened older Batman that I
Yes.
loved, and I
Yep.
was not excited for him, um, but I really ended up enjoying him. and then of course like Gal Gadot with Wonder Woman, and that I still think back to when she
Like
drops in.
the coolest entrance of all time.
And the music, I mean, like her music is iconic now. And
Yes.
is she with you? I thought she was with you. Um,
Yeah.
I really enjoy it. I really enjoy that movie.
Yeah, I think it's really good. And I mean, you mentioned the Martha thing, and for me, that's been one complaint which I understand a little bit, but I've never really had a problem with. Like, I
Yeah.
get the criticism, but I also think that makes total sense because for me, I'm gonna go on a little rant here. For me, like Batman is my favorite character of all time, as I mentioned, like out of everything. And I think that what makes him the most interesting compared to anyone else is because he's this man who he's lost his parents when he was a boy, so he's orphaned everything, so he's lost everything. And now that he's this tougher guy, and especially with Ben Affleck, because he's this older, like Batfleck as they
Mhm.
call him, just I love that. And here, what really makes him vulnerable, like he's a very tough guy, but he's very vulnerable, and the way that they show that is with his parents in all the Batman and all the good Batman iterations. It's shown through his parents of that. That's what really gets him. So for me, there's really no difference here when they say Martha. Like, yeah, it's weird that the two of the biggest superheroes ever have the same mom's name, but like it works in that way because the way that Batman is vulnerable, because he's tough, he's smart, he has all the gadgets, everything he needs, and the muscle, because Ben Affleck got ripped for this movie,
Mhm.
and it's even shown in the movie. But it's the one thing that can get it's basically his kryptonite.
Yep,
It's
absolutely.
it's his parents and their death, and I think that's what makes it so emotional, and that's why I've never had a problem with it.
Well, and people that have a problem with it should probably have a problem with how the characters were written way back when, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not like Snyder invented it. He just said, "Hey, here's something we can use." That's number one. But number two is like exactly what you're saying. Batman is born out. His whole persona is born out of losing his parents, and his view on the world is shaped by that. So for the one thing that breaks through his rage and sort of his tunnel vision to be the name of his mother, totally makes sense.
Yes.
To me, like I don't want I said brilliant earlier. It's to me it is kind of brilliant. Like, what's the one thing that's going to stop him from killing Superman? Bring up his dead mother. Like it makes sense to me.
Yeah, it's like yeah, it's brutal, but it makes sense, and that's what like and that whole Batman versus Superman fight, even people who don't like the movie, that was always the one thing they said. They said the fight's amazing because it is. It's one of my favorite. I wouldn't say scenes, but superhero sequences because it's such a
Yeah,
long sequence.
absolutely.
It's one of my favorites ever because it's so brutal. Again, as you're talking about, like DC's really grounded in realism. That's why I love them. Like people always say DC or Marvel. For me, I don't even know. I love them both. So, but
Right.
I do love how DC is so grounded in it, and it works here. Like the punches too, like with the sound design and the cinematography, like the punches sound real. I remember back when I was younger, and again when I was really starting to get into movies, was a little bit about around this time, not fully until a few years later. But I would go watch behind the scenes because I'm like, are they actually punching each other? Like that was one thing because for me it seems so real, and I feel like that's one of the biggest compliments is that I really believe that people were getting their asses kicked in
Yeah.
this. So that's a major compliment to the stunt team.
I totally agree with you, and I think back to that, the bathroom scene where they're fighting in the bathroom,
Yes.
and uh, Batman's punching Superman in the face, and like he just gives that little smirk, like the Superman smirk. That's one of
Yeah.
my favorite. Like I don't know, I just love it because then they just go into again beating the hell out of each other, and even when they team up later, and like when Batman goes to save Martha, that whole fight scene is showcasing Ben Affleck and of course the stunt team, but that
Yeah.
choreography is incredible. And one thing that I think a lot of people say this about Marvel movies too, and not to make it a DC versus Marvel thing, but
Yep.
Marvel, their fight scenes a lot of times are very choreographed and visibly choreographed, I should say. That's one of the things with like Shang-Chi when I saw it. I really enjoyed it. It's a very good movie. The
I
choreograph,
haven't seen it yet, but I'm
yeah,
excited.
yeah, it's definitely a great movie. But it's the choreographed fighting was very noticeable to me at one point, and exactly like you're saying, I don't get that in the DC movies. Maybe a little bit with Birds of Prey, but with the Snyder movies, not at all. It's gritty, it is brutal, and it is exactly what I want out of those movies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And like when you mentioned that the Martha scene where he goes to save her, I remember one thing that we'll talk. This will lead into something that we need to talk about. But one thing I remember, this is like the thing that scared me when I watched the movie, is the pictures of Martha with like the cuts, everything. That scared the shit out of me. Okay,
Yeah.
I was when I first saw that because I was younger, I got so scared of that. I don't know why. And obviously that is shown by Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor. And what do you think of it? Because everybody has different opinions. What do you think of him?
So I go back and forth with him. I love the direction of taking him in like a Mark Zuckerberg, like modern billionaire type direction.
Isn't that ironic? No.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's pretty smart. Um, I don't know that he was my favorite part of the movie, but I would have liked to see how he developed because I think that part of it, like he had this obsession, right, and that he was trying to pit them against one another. Successfully does, and then we were going to see more, obviously, with the setup of putting together the team,
Yeah.
the anti Justice League, so to speak, down the road, and what could have been with that would have been incredible. I don't know. It's very he's different. It's a very different take. We also only have like really two major people to look back to when it comes to Lex Luthor. So you're talking about Kevin Spacey. You talk about Michael Rosenbaum in Smallville, who was what I grew up with, and that was a younger take on it as well, and I enjoyed that. So I don't know. He's Jesse Eisenberg also is a divisive actor because he's peculiar. And I think that
Yes.
was also part of the intent here. It's like, let's play with this peculiar guy behind the scenes pulling the strings and see what happens.
Yeah, that's what like for me, I do not know the last time I've seen like the original Superman movies or anything like for me, I don't have really any Lex Luthor to compare him to. I know just from being a big superhero fan that Lex Luthor is different. You know, he's like the businessman top like bald
Yeah,
everything that we see at the end. So I know that it's very different and I I understand basically all of the complaints and there are definitely scenes in here that I agree with, but
absolutely.
I do like that Jesse Eisenberg and Snyder, like they all kind of took a different approach. I like that it was kind of risky and different, but I do understand all the criticisms here. And I gotta ask, what is your favorite scene of the entire movie, and
Well,
what makes it your favorite?
I do have to say that I forgot to mention Gene Hackman too from like old school, but
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
I'm totally yeah. So oh god, favorite scene and what makes
it's
it my
tough.
favorite. It is so tough. I think the fight sequence is definitely one of my favorites because it kind of harkens back to it's a silly part of the fight sequence, but it also happens in Man of Steel where he tries flying away and they just like drop him or like pull
Yeah.
him down. I love that. I think that's incredible. Um, so I like that whole sequence. I'd also say that the sequence at the fundraiser at Lex Luthor's mansion is just a
Yes.
lot of fun because it's showing like the three of them just in as plain people and living amongst us. And
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of fun. I want to mention one thing real quick though. You mentioned about
Yes.
the kind of taking things in a different direction. And I think that's what a lot of people had issues with here, right? Like Snyder did take things in a different direction. The whole Jimmy Olsen thing, like all of that was very, it was reinterpreted. And I think what like we all have to remember, and I talk to like family members about this a lot and friends who grew up with comics. Today, it's like what we're seeing on screen in both DC and Marvel are new interpretations, sometimes modern day interpretations. So,
Yep.
the heart of the story is there. So Doomsday, obviously, very different how he was created here.
Yes.
Um, by the way, best Doomsday creation. If you ever want to see a good scene, I don't know if you ever watched Krypton, the series.
I haven't. No.
Krypton follows his Superman's grandfather on Krypton, and like
Oh.
years prior, there's only two seasons of it, but it's so good. They have a whole episode about the creation of Doomsday, and it's wild. But I like that reinterpretation. It's like making it fit the story. You're kind of staying true to him. I mean, as he absorbed the energy, he grew the spikes, which is what Doomsday does.
Yes.
I love that stuff. So picking one scene is tough because I just really enjoy what was done with this film.
Oh yeah, like that's always a question in every single one of these episodes. I always ask, what is your favorite scene if you have one, or what is one of your favorites? Because everybody struggles with it. Even I struggle. Like my favorite scene, I would say, is the whole fight sequence, but that's like 30 minutes. Like that's
Right.
so long. And like, I mean, when Batman enters the warehouse, it is just the choreography there is some of my favorite any superhero film. That's even before he starts beating down Superman and all that. But I also love the smaller moments and even the opening. Like as you said, it picks like much earlier. You said it picks up right where Man of Steel left off, and I think that's so smart because you see everything, you see the destruction, and right away it sets the tone really well because you know how Bruce Wayne like holds a girl and she's like, "Where's your mother?" And then she points, she's up there, and it's just like that alone sets the tone. And then we see it like with a bit with his like parents and the funeral and stuff with the credits and all that.
Yeah.
That's what I really love about this movie. And I mean, the end, the whole Superman sacrifice, and then the dirt floating. I remember watching it in the theater when the dirt floated. I was like, yeah, they wouldn't kill him. They wouldn't.
Right. Well, and that was one of the complaints too. Everyone's like, "It's stupid to kill him. We know he'll be back." Like, yeah, we know he'll be back because the comics are out there. Like, of course you
Yeah.
know where they're going. Just like it's part of the story development. One other scene you mentioned it earlier, so the bathtub scene, but everything
Yes.
around there, I really enjoyed.
Yes.
Like, it just showed him real in an apartment, watching the news, and I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, again, it makes them feel like real people, and obviously Henry Cavill is your favorite person on Earth. So your TikToks are hilarious. I love watching those.
I do love
And
Henry Cavill.
yeah, I mean, who doesn't? Let's be honest. And would you say he's your favorite character? Do you like Superman or Batman more in this film?
Superman, definitely. I kind of grew up loving Superman, so like much like you're a big Batman guy.
Yeah.
One of the things with Superman that really always excited me, or I thought was interesting, I guess is a better way to say it, is like he's all powerful in so many ways, but like the most minor thing, a green rock, can bring him down.
Yes.
And it's kind of like an interesting life lesson too. Like just it just takes one thing to kind of like knock you off your path, and just being aware and fighting those little fights. So I've always kind of gravitated towards him more.
Yeah, I mean, like for Superman, for me, I've really enjoyed. Like, I love Superman. He's one of my favorite superheroes, and I say Batman because like I'm looking at my Dark Knight trilogy poster over there, and like I've grown up. I watched the original, like the Tim Burton films. I've watched Batman Forever and Batman and Robin a million times as a kid, even knowing they're bad, still watching them.
Absolutely.
And he's just like I kind of went into it before. And for Superman, my favorite interpretation of him, one of my favorite interpretations of any comic book like superhero or anything is Henry Cavill. I think
Yeah.
that he is perfectly cast here. Like even with like with the Christopher Reeve ones and all that, like I don't remember too much about it, but I do know that not saying they're bad movies. I can't think of exactly the movies, but I'm saying the I'm going a little rant here. The interpretation of Superman I enjoy more for Henry Cavill because I love the grounded and I love Batfleck as well. And Gal Gadot is like perfectly cast, but Henry
Yeah.
Cavill always will stand out to me. And it's sad that we probably won't get him anymore, but he was great in Man of Steel, great here, great in the Snyder Cut. And I love how this does lead into I love how he was brought back in the Snyder Cut
Yeah.
compared to Justice League or whatever you want to call that garbage.
I think the casting all around has been really good, with the exception of maybe Jesse Eisenberg. Maybe like that's debatable, but I totally agree with that. And I grew up watching some of the old Christopher Reeves movies, and he was Superman right at that time. He was perfect for those movies, and
Yeah.
the thematic sequences within them. Like he for the time that those were made, he was Superman.
Yeah.
When they cast Brandon Routh back for Superman Returns, I was like, okay, I can kind of see it. Didn't love the movie, obviously. But then as soon as Henry Cavill steps on the screen in Man of Steel, you're like, yeah, that's Superman today. Like
It
that
is.
is, if he fits the tone of Snyder's storytelling so well. And just, I don't know. I just really enjoy him. I think he's a great actor.
Oh yeah, he's amazing. And what's really impressive about superheroes, this is something that I noticed that some actors struggle with, is they have to be able to pull off the superhero and the
Hmm.
person, and that's what I love about like all the great ones. Like for me, obviously Christian Bale is my favorite actor, and I even love his Batman voice. I've talked about that. Some people don't, and I love his Bruce Wayne, and I love his Batman, Batfleck. Like I love Ben Affleck's Bruce Wayne because it's an older, grittier one, and Batman and Superman. Like Henry Cavill, I love his Clark Kent. It's perfect for
Yeah,
me. And then his Superman is, one of the coolest guys ever. So I think that's what's really nailed well. Obviously, Gal Gadot was amazing here, and also Jeremy Irons does not get enough credit.
I
He
agree.
is
I agree.
so good as Alfred. Like he's my favorite one besides Michael Caine. Like when I think of like the perfect Alfred to match with Ben Affleck, it's him. He's got the voice, he's got everything. I love it. I really do love this movie. I think it's a genuinely great movie.
It really is. I really enjoy it. And, all the thing with the casting is they're all tortured beings, right? Like any superhero is going to be tortured. And that's one thing that DC explores. It's like, how does someone like this live in society? And how would we really react? So like for me, like the Senate hearings and stuff, I'm like, I love
Yes.
this. Number one, I'm a political nerd, but like number two, I'm like, this is exactly what would happen. It makes sense.
Exactly. It works all together. I think that's what makes Snyder one of my favorite comic book directors because if you include 300 as well, 300 is a comic book movie and I think it's an incredible film. And then we have his like official kind of like it's been tampered with, but official superhero trilogy. And I do hope to get the 4K set of Man of Steel, Batman vs Superman, and then
Yeah.
the Snyder cut because I'm glad and I really am dying to rewatch the Snyder cut. I've been waiting for it to come out on 4K to rewatch it because I know you've seen it a million times. And I have to thank you. I have to thank you for coming on because it was a ton of fun. This is one of my favorite episodes I've done. And is there anything else you want to say about the movie or anything in general?
No, I mean, hey, it's just a lot of fun, and I think well, maybe this, regardless of what happens in the future with DC, I think like people just need to like let things happen, right? Like we're still holding on to the past with Snyder, and I wish they would have continued on with Justice League, and I'm glad that Batfleck is coming back, and we're seeing some of the seeds that were planted like bloom, but.
Yes.
It's time to like move on. That doesn't mean I like what DC's doing. I think I jokingly said this on TikTok. I think it was like, and we talked about it on our pod last week. But they announced the Black Canary movie. Awesome, that's going to be solid. I want to know what's happening with Henry Cavill. Like, is he coming back or
Yes.
not? And how have you not told us anything about this
I
in
agree.
years? Um, but I think that it's time to give DC a little bit more room to like regroup and stop trying to pull them down because it's not going to benefit any one of us who are really fans of the properties.
Yeah,
So
like I'm really excited for the films that are going to come out. For the most part, Aquaman 2, not excited for Amber Heard coming back. That's something I will always mention, but I'm excited to see what's going to happen in the future. They're not. I feel like they're just not going to do a David Ayer cut, and I know people will still fight for it. And I mean, it worked for the Snyder cut, but people are going to keep going. I don't know if it's going to work. I guess we'll just have to find out. But once again, thank you for coming on. This was a ton of fun. Everybody watching this, I hope you guys are the fans of Batman vs Superman because I know already that we're gonna get a ton of negative comments before like 30 minutes the video's posted. Like people won't watch the whole episode. It'll be like the second it's posted, how the fuck is Batman vs Superman one of your
right.
favorites? It'll
Hey, I
happen.
I own it.
It's okay. It's like it's really a personal thing, and all of Joe's stuff will be linked down below. I highly recommend it all. It's some of my favorite stuff out there, and I'll see you guys next week for episode 21. That's a long time. Thank you all for watching. See you guys next time. Over and out.